find out the facts, to find out the truth, it helps to start from the premise that powerful people who run our society have every interest in hiding it from us.
One of the most disconcerting things I find as someone who's worked in politics is the constant accusation that lying is endemic in politics. Because even when conscious they are lying, we would all regard them as lying, they don't think so.
There's always been lies, political bias within politics. I think the question is really about why this has become a political problem right now.
There is an ongoing genocidal campaign happening against the people of Gaza by Israel, and probably one of the most blatant and well-funded misinformation campaigns to ensure that you, the public, think that Israel is the victim.
The fact that two people might disagree on whether the sky is blue has no bearing on whether the sky is blue. And the same goes for political facts and lies. Either a claim is true or it's not. Now, of course, with many issues, there's nuance, there's complexity, but nuance impacts moral judgments, moral considerations, not the underlying set of facts. The underlying set of facts, the only question is, are they true or false? And this is why in our media and political system, it's not a question of whether we can distinguish between facts and lies. It's in fact our responsibility to distinguish between facts and lies. In our Western political system, we have the privilege of enjoying a lot of relative freedoms. Most of us can vote for candidates, we can criticize our governments, we can express dissenting opinions, and we have a lot of access to information without interference from state censorship. That means we have ample ways to find out the truth if we want to seek it. And I think we should, because powerful lies can have major consequences, not only for our society, but societies across the planet. As Julian Assange says, if wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth. The problem with finding out the truth to me is not a philosophical one, but a political one. If it's true, as the adage goes, that the truth can set you free, there are plenty of people in power with an interest in keeping us in our chains and depriving us from the truth. That means we have to grapple with the centers of power in corporations and the government that are constantly trying to hide the truth from us. In the original preface to Animal Farm, which is about thought control in totalitarian societies, George Orwell wrote this about our society. The sinister fact about literary censorship in England is that it is largely voluntary. Unpopular ideas can be silenced and inconvenient facts kept dark without the need for any official ban. The British press is extremely centralized, and most of it is owned by wealthy men who have every motive to be dishonest on certain important topics. But the same kind of veiled censorship also operates in books and periodicals, as well as in plays, film, and radio. At any given moment, there is an orthodoxy, a body of ideas, which it is assumed that all right-thinking people will accept without question. It is not exactly forbidden to say this, that, or the other, but it is not done to say it. Just as in, say, mid-Victorian times, it was not done to mention trousers in the presence of a lady. Anyone who challenges the prevailing orthodoxy finds himself or herself silenced with surprising effectiveness. A genuinely unfashionable opinion is almost never given a fair hearing, either in the popular press or in the highbrow periodicals. George Orwell wrote that in 1945, and by the way, that preface didn't appear in the original printing of Animal Farm. It only surfaced mysteriously many years later. But his warning from that time very much applies today. To find out the facts, to find out the truth, it helps to start from the premise that powerful people who run our society have every interest in hiding it from us. That's a good place to start. Thank you.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you, Aaron. So, Phil, turning to you, we've heard from Aaron. It seems quite straightforward. The job of a good journalist is just finding out the facts, finding out the truth. Is that your experience?
Not entirely, because the eradication of bias from politics is impossible and undesirable. Politics is the way we negotiate our biases, our views of the world. We differ. reasonable people have different views of the world, and democratic politics is the way we navigate them, the way we negotiate them. So the principal requirement in an era in which truth is under assault is that we are generous to our opponents, is that we take the time to understand the opposing views and render them in a way which their proponents would also regard as a satisfactory account. We've lost that art. Politics is now endlessly rivalrous and cacophonous. So many outlets, so many platforms. But that art of generosity to the opponent, preliminary to a really tight, vicious disagreement, is absolutely the art of democratic conversation. And if we don't have that, then there will be no agreed body of facts. I do agree, of course, there has to be an agreed body of facts for a democracy to function, for politics to function at all. But there are differences of value in politics which are not themselves factual. I could make the statement that material inequality is a serious problem for Western societies. Now, that might seem an uncontentious thing to some people and might be regarded as a highly selective thing to say to others. It's not a fact as such. It's a statement for which I need to provide supporting evidence. So there's lots of those arguments where we need to have a discussion in good faith. So the mood in which we talk is crucial. And one of the most disconcerting things I find as someone who's worked in politics is the constant accusation that lying is endemic in politics. Now, we'll come to the recent developments where it's become much more so, but in fact, in my experience, outright lying, where the person knows what they're saying to be untrue and says it in the full knowledge that it is untrue, is incredibly rare in politics, very rare, because the penalty for that kind of lying is high. It's quite common that there's misinformation, which is a separate category. It's also very common, here's an unfashionable, that people make mistakes. There are all sorts of errors, which are subsequently shown to be untrue, but that's not the same as them being a lie. And then there's all sorts of times when actually people say things when they don't really know what they're talking about. And the most crucial thing is excessive promises. Many of the things which people regard as politicians lying are politicians making an excessive and unredeemable promise. So over the last 10 years in this country, party after party has said, we will reduce immigration into Britain, knowing they can't really, wanting to believe it to be true because they regard that as something their electorate wanted, making a promise which has not been redeemed. Now, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is an entirely separate question. But the corrosive effect that that kind of excessive promise has on the language of politics is much more important than the rare instances when politicians are consciously lying. Because even when conscious they are lying, as we would all regard them as lying, they don't think so. Because when you take the obvious example of President Trump, he doesn't sit there thinking he's lying. He has his own version of the truth. We then need to refer back to a body of truths, and this is where I think we'd all agree, that is a standard against which we can judge the rhetoric of politicians, and that would provide us a place where if we're generous to one another, we could have a conversation which shed some light, but without the heat.
Phil, thank you. So Phil's brought in this notion of democratic conversation. This feels like a good moment to turn to you, Inaya, and invite you to pitch your ideas. Political facts, political lies. What do you think?
I think that there's always been lies, political bias within politics. I think the question is really about why this has become a political problem right now. And I think that the reason, which I think is said in the kind of notes about why we're having this discussion, is partly because there's record numbers of people in the US and the UK that don't trust the mainstream media, whatever that means, and the various sources. And I think that we have to understand why that is. And I think when you have organizations, whether that's the Daily Mail or The Guardian, I think there's broadly a clarity in terms of the political perspective that they're coming from. But I think what's been challenging for a lot of people is that institutions over the last decade or so that has presented themselves as ostensibly neutral and impartial have actually, for many people, taken positions on deeply contested issues. Just a few examples. I mean, the scientific institutions, many people on the gender critical feminist side have felt that they have said certain things about the nature of biological sex, which differs from what most people's understanding of that issue is. and then that they've used their position as ostensibly objective institutions in order to take political positions. And we saw many similar things throughout the pandemic as well, whether there were contested ideas, for example, about how to mitigate COVID-19 and what the responses should be. But actually institutions that frame themselves as neutral, impartial, objective were often taking politicized positions. And we saw that, again, similarly during many media like the BBC and other institutions in America, when it comes to conflict, when it comes to issues of identity, many of these big debates that we've had as a society, it has felt that the places that have told us that they are impartial, told us that they are neutral, are often been the ones that have actually taken a highly politicized view. And I think, yes, there's a range of different views in the public, but I tend to trust the public and think that they're not stupid and know when they're being, presented with arguments that are claimed to be objective, but oftentimes are highly biased. So I think that has, contributed to a deep sense that that the places that we would previously go to for factual, concrete, evidence-based information have no longer actually served that function. I think that's a deep problem for democracy, as you said, because in order to have a functioning society, we need to have some kind of shared space, and we need to have confidence that the information that we're being told, we can collectively work with that in order to come to certain decisions and take certain positions. So I think that institutions that pride themselves on those kinds of values should really reflect upon the extent to which they're doing that and the extent to which they're presenting a range of views. And just very quick point. One of the things that contributed to the riots last year was a misinformation that was spread online that the killer of the horrendous killer of those girls was a Muslim asylum seeker, and that was found not to be true. But what was very interesting is that essentially 20 years prior, in Birmingham, there were riots between the Black community and the Asian community based off of a rumor that Asian shopkeepers were raping young Black women. And this rumor was actually being spread on various blogs and pirate radio. So this is even before the internet. And part of the reason why that rumor rang true for a lot of people, even though it was completely false, was because there was a particular unresolved tension within that community, which allowed and created a space where people came up with certain ideas that rang true for people and they ran with it. And I think that sometimes we panic, understandably, about misinformation and what that can lead, but we don't actually address why do certain ideas resonate at a particular time, and why does that feel true for people to such an extent where even when you present the facts, people don't really believe them. So I think getting to that underlying tension within society is also part of it.
Thank you. So, Myriam, Inaya is suggesting things are a little bit more complicated. What's your point of view? Political facts, political lies.
Thank you so much. Well, firstly, it's a pleasure to be back with you all this year. Obviously, we are speaking at a time where, there is an ongoing genocidal campaign happening against the people of Gaza by Israel, and probably one of the most blatant and well-funded misinformation campaigns to ensure that you, the public, think that Israel is the victim when it's the 2.2 million people. And so I have to open with that, because I think, this debate probably wouldn't even be happening if it wasn't for the fact that many of us are more and more aware of the ways that there are attempts to manipulate our understanding of facts on the ground of the most live-streamed genocide in our modern history. I want to start also by highlighting that as we're meeting Julian Assange's film, The $6 Billion Man, which is, of course, about the founder of WikiLeaks, who challenged government secrecy through the leak of thousands of classified documents and subsequently spent 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy, essentially in prison. That film has just won the jury's special award at Cannes. And I highlight that because it's a welcome reminder of the ways in which truth is under siege right now. It's under siege from the skewing and the silencing of, as I mentioned, Israel's campaign in Gaza, to Trump's completely false claims of a white genocide in South Africa via, the summer riots, which we heard, of course, mentioned here. So truth-telling today is a form of resistance, and government repression and the confluence of private interests, together with surveillance on the very platforms in which many of us seek to share and draw on truth, is a real threat to our ability to access it and to understand, in fact, the facts before us. The title suggests that facts differ depending on your side, and I'm afraid that I disagree with that. I disagree with the framing of the facts. I think facts differ based on your positioning. Your interpretation of the facts differ on your positioning, but the facts themselves, of course, are immutable. That is literally what makes them facts. And as a journalist and filmmaker, in my line of work, facts really do matter. They matter because many of us aspire to depict an accurate representation of events for our audiences, first and foremost, so that you can situate yourselves with regards to the range of views on that issue. When I tell you about something as a reporter, as a filmmaker, it's not because I want you to believe what I believe, it's because I want you to understand there are loads of different perspectives on this issue, and you have a right to decide for yourselves where you stand on that issue. And why is that important? It's important because we are increasingly siloed into very narrow sources of information. I mean, your algorithm is already, presumably most of you are on social media, we are all kind of victims of the algorithmic siloing, which means that we're continuously exposed to self-confirming biases. And I think what's really important now is determining processes which journalists traditionally have been required to abide by to determine what is reliable, what is not. And we can ask a few serious questions that most good journalists would. What is the source? Can it be corroborated by others? Can it be verified directly? What are the alternative perspectives? Who holds them and why? But even with that said, facts are not neutral. They are shaped by power, by history, by where we stand in the world.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below.
With a free trial, you can enjoy the full talk and thousands more.
Thank you for being part of the conversation.